Hey, welcome everybody to our podcast, Opening Day Sportsman. We have guests with us today, Jennifer Guerrero, the head honcho, Randy Santucci, myself, Dan Davila. We have quite a bit to talk about today. Um, Number
It's
one,
been a while.
we're gonna go. Yeah, it's been a while. We're going to go over the why of this, why we're here. How did the opener come to volition and the change that the Pennsylvania Game Commission enacted? Now it's going into what, the fifth year, Randy?
Yeah, we just completed the fifth year of this.
Yeah. So anyway, we still are a couple tidbits that we want everybody to know. Our Facebook and coalition numbers are continuing to grow. We're picking up new people every week. Some Saturday supporters that have now seen what has happened to their own experience in hunting. And with us today, with Jennifer Guerrero, she's going to join our group. How long ago was it, Jennifer?
It
Two
was,
years?
yeah, probably about 2 years I've
About
been
2 years.
following
So
it.
Jennifer has some female uh, interactions here that we feel are important, and being a mother and a homemaker, and also is working outside the home as well. So she's going to go into in depth of how it affected her and her family. And so, with that, Jennifer, I'm going to just start out with uh, how did you get involved in this project?
Yeah, sure. Well, thank you again to both of you for having me on. I will correct that I am a dog mom, so I just will clear that up. But I am an aunt
Okay.
to a 4-year-old niece
You have to
who's
work on that, I guess.
my mini me. But yeah, so just a little background, and then I'll go into how I got involved. But I've been hunting since I was probably 12 years old. While I was born in Pennsylvania, I am an out-of-state female hunter, as mentioned. Um, and those of you who are listening are probably like, "Wow, I've seen the bucks in Ohio. What are you doing hunting in Pennsylvania?" But I am a fourth generation of a long-standing Pennsylvania hunting camp started in the 1920s by my great-grandfather. So there's my connection there, and that's why I returned to Pennsylvania. Little bit of background, though, on my involvement in the work. So I'll tell you all that when the change was first announced, I wasn't really sure of what the impact would be. You know, I didn't know, I didn't expect uh, a huge impact until about a year or two in. And then it was then really when I started to hear of some of the family and the community impacts, I started to realize, well, oh, there's really something wrong here with this change. And then when I began to witness the contagious disgust that we'll elaborate on here in a bit amongst my fellow hunters, I said, wow, we've got to do something about this. And that's when I really started to get involved. And so I presented at the April 2023 town hall in front of the Board of Commissioners. And after my speech, I was approached by Commissioner Geiger, who presented me with a PGC challenge coin. And her comment was she shared how appreciative she was of my ability to articulate my opinion on the matter. And that was that. And then right after that, I initiated direct outreach to Pennsylvania state reps and legislators to really highlight from my perspective some of this alarming behavior. And I traveled over to Harrisburg for some one-on-one discussions. And much of the outreach done before me, as mentioned, was really from male hunters, generally older than me. And so I felt it was extremely important to hear my perspective as a female hunter in the 18 to 34-year age group who has a genuine concern for what this decision has done for our sport.
Wow. So what exactly would be your opinion of what they've done to the sport? What did you actually see when 2 years in?
So I would say, you know, beyond these well-known negative impacts that we've continued to discuss, right? The impact on families, communities, businesses, fundraising, this decrease of hunters. One of the most concerning impacts that I see and continue to see, and I feel like it's getting worse, is this lack of trust for the PGC. And I think that this has really led to the premature turnover of previously dedicated hunters. And this was all generated by a decision that was made without justification. And
That's the part we're going to go over here, I think, a little later in the podcast, because Dan and I talked about this yesterday. There is an inordinate amount of information and things that have happened in the last few months because we haven't done a podcast. But carry on, Jen. You're right on spot with where this whole thing started and where it's headed. So please continue.
Yeah, sure. Appreciate it. And so I just want to call out just one quick thing here. In my line of work, I spend a lot of time executing what's called change management. And in a nutshell, managing change has various steps. The first thing you have to do is identify a case for change, and this is otherwise known as the why. And I know that we're going to get into that concept, later in the podcast. So I'm going to keep going in the change management process. Then you have to understand your stakeholders, right? Understand how it's going to impact them. Then you do an exercise called a pre-mortem. And I'm going to elaborate on that here in a moment. Then you communicate the change, and then of course you implement the change if you decide to continue with it. Now this pre-mortem, and you'll see why I'm bringing this up, but it's an exercise where you essentially launch yourself into the future and you pretend that the change has already occurred and you document every single thing that went wrong. And now this might sound like a very negative exercise, but that's actually the point. And it allows you to understand how the change will land. It gives you the chance to evaluate risk. And then if the desire at that point is still to pursue this said change, then you can create some mitigation strategies to make sure it lands okay and it's effective and it does what you're trying to do. And again, the reason I bring this up is because if we never got the why behind this change, I can almost guarantee that risk was never evaluated.
Oh, for sure.
You don't make a change unless you've got a business case for change, right?
Right. And not only that, they hid behind, and they put out there that this was to increase youth participation. And when you look at the working meetings back in 2019, it was very clear that they were going to enact this change, and they all added their own personal touches to it, like my college kids will be able to hunt with me, yada yada, without ever talking about the things that may not go correctly. And as we both know, or all of us know, Brian Burhans has continued to state, well, yeah, youth sales are continuing to decrease, but not as much. But then the other aspect that is that whole other group of hunters, the older crowd, it decimated that group. And so was that worth it?
This was frustrating.
Yeah.
Yeah, Dan, this was.
Go ahead, Randy.
When this first started back in 2018, when I watched the first working group meeting, the why factor was literally what Dan had said earlier. It was a personal rendition of what they thought was going to unfold. Of course, they turned this over to their staff for surveys and some research, and it came back in April or March, rather, the March meeting in 2020, and nothing supported it. The presumptions and the perceived benefits that, for instance, like Dan had mentioned, the college kids. Now there was a personal statement made. There were several here, and one of them was from Commissioner Foradora that about his college. He could hunt with his college-age sons. He was seeing this very tunnel visioned, in my opinion, and Dr. Jagno had addressed that. The science of her surveys. She had asked the college-age students and college students which of four. She had put four perceptive or potential starting dates out there, including the Monday opener, and it came back. The majority supported the Monday. She went on to say, to kind of elaborate on that. She said, in my conversations with this group, these college students told me that they would miss class for a lot less reasons than the deer opener. So you sit there from my perspective and you say, okay, that shut down the aspect of thinking that the college student demographic was going to increase. It wasn't. And she kind of, and this is what has happened. We're going to touch on some of this here shortly, that the reason we're 5 years into this, the reason there's legislative input, the reason there's a growing support to put this back, was because, which, like exactly the way you're describing it from the professional perspective, Jen, that the procedure of this type of a change of this magnitude was not even in place, let alone followed. So if you can continue on your professional aspect here and what you bring to this conversation kind of puts some upper end analysis on my crude observations that were common sense to me, but please continue.
No, that's great. Well, yeah, it really just boils down to that statement. I mean, you don't implement a change unless you really need to. And before you do that, you got to think it through. And let's evaluate it. That obviously never happened either. And we know that. So I want to comment.
I have to disagree with you there, Jen. It was evaluated, and as a result, Commissioner Daley, resigned over it. That they had the data, and this is a group that, along with Brian Birdman's, said, "Hey, we're following the science." Well, it was presented that it wasn't going to work, and they did it anyway. Go ahead.
So I'll continue to comment on taking some of my background, and I want to shift gears and talk about recruitment. And we know the 3 R's, right? Recruit, retain, and reactivate. And in some conversations that I had with some of the Pennsylvania state legislators, representatives, I really brought up this concept of recruiting. But here's the angle I'm taking. One of your main supporters or levers of recruitment are your current hunters. But we're seeing this drop, right? This premature turnover of hunters. So if you think about it, if you recruit, you're always going to have to recruit. That's a given. Always going to have to recruit new hunters. But you shouldn't have to constantly have all of this focus on reactivating hunters, which I have a concern of in the next few years, as we're already seeing hunters not buying licenses because of this issue, this concern, and the impacts that the opener has done. So let's talk about
a successful event, you would think, or a successful procedure would reactivate itself.
Absolutely.
And that's where we're at here with this issue. The demographic of hunters in Pennsylvania, camps make up yet 25%. And there's a lot more beyond that have the conflicts that we're going to discuss here shortly. So, that said, you can't, how do you look at something where you're going to disenfranchise hundreds of thousands of Pennsylvania hunters from long-standing traditions and so forth? How is that a cost-benefit win when you're not bringing in a fraction of 1,000 into the fold with the youth? So this is where this is so ridiculously out of balance. It makes no sense even today. It didn't work. And the perceptions they had may have been overblown. And of course, we know there was some influence regarding us, bringing in that 3 days of Sunday hunting with the political influence. And I've said this before, if indeed that's what this was about, mission accomplished. But let's go back and take a step and look at, okay, how can we better use those days and put this Monday back and get back onto the longstanding traditions and values and things that we loved with that weekend, economically and otherwise. So,
sure.
But again, it's been a frustrating 5 years.
Absolutely. And the thing is if you do this right, if the Game Commission did this right, you shouldn't have to reactivate, and you should really focus on recruitment. And retaining is going to happen with your current hunters, right? It's a natural thing. But beyond this, with some of these changes that they've made, opener and some of these other implications that have happened. And as I mentioned earlier, this lack of trust that exists, this impacts both recruiting and retention and ultimately the future of the sport within the state. What we also need to be concerned about, though, are other impacts, like when we have decreased hunters, we now have decreased conservation efforts. We have economic impacts, the list goes on and on and on. But then we also think about our youth, right? How often do we hear in the media that we have concerns with our youth with mental health, obesity, excessive screen time? All of these things can be addressed with this overall interest in becoming outdoorsmen and outdoors women, and pursuing sports like hunting, fishing, etc. And so there are far many more benefits of creating tradition and getting these youth involved and enjoying and understanding the preparation and the safety aspects and all of these things that we need to do.
So let me understand what you're saying. That the science and biology is not the end all. There's
Sure.
much more to this game
Absolutely.
than assessing, X's and O's on here we are, and this is the part of this formula. And we're starting to see a very, very big part of this formula for this particular activity. Hunting is family based. It's something that has been passed on from generation to generation. And if you're going to interject something that's going to disrupt that chain of events, that's an enormous change.
Right. And it's not just the family. You're talking about the village. You're talking about aunts and uncles, the camps. Maybe the dad wasn't a hunter, but his brother was, and took your kids hunting. I had that experience as a kid, going to hunt with my neighbors. And and the other aspect to go along with what you're saying, and Randy and I proposed to them in that meeting in October with Brian Burhans and Commissioner
Denny Fredericks.
They're
allowed to use the facilities, and we're trying to get that aspect in there with that, what we presented at that meeting. That, that school district that's doing this, it's been doing this for 50 years as part of a elected curriculum. Instead of a study hall, you take hunter ed, essentially. And it's been a highly successful thing there. But
we'd like to see that expanded.
Yeah, we look at each other. How could a program that's existed in this particular school district for that long not be something that is championed by the agency, pursued by the agency, to whatever degree it becomes successful? There's several hundred school districts in this state. If this works well in the one, I think, Dan, you brought up a point today. How many schools have these shooting teams?
41. There's 41.
So you have at least 41 school districts with shooting teams and so forth, which already has that inherent, acceptance of firearms and so forth. But I'm sure there's a lot more rural school districts now, that some of these, teachers and so forth would be willing to take the reins to oversee this program. It does take that within this, the program that we presented. There are individuals within the school, teachers, that oversee and run this in the program and graduate. What was it, Dan? Depending on the year, 50 to 100 from one school district.
Yep.
And
in fact, we are going to present to them. We're still working out the details with that school. I don't want to say the school just yet, but we will announce that with a plaque for a recommendation or commendation of the great job that they've done to enhance the youth program. And we feel that's an area that they should have looked at before. They've changed a lot of opening days on many different seasons, and this was the Super Bowl, so to speak, weekend. And to change that, there's a reason why, and I brought this up at my 5-minute talk, and I have to tell you that 5 minutes up until last year was never recorded. Public comments, they did not feel that was worth listening to the hunters, so they didn't record it.
We had brought that up to them, and I had in several testimonies prior that why does Fish and Boat include the public comment portion of the meeting in with their live stream recordings that are put online,
Yeah.
and the game commission has a big blank spot until we get back to their controlled agenda. And it's changed. That had just changed at the last meeting, finally, and that's a good thing.
Yeah.
But
there's a reason why the NFL had 2 weeks in between the championship games and the Super Bowl. And we needed, and remember 1 year they made it 1 week and it was a disaster. It was a disaster of biblical proportion. There's a reason why we need to have those extra days. Number one, as Randy has said all along, let's put Thanksgiving to bed. Let's do our whatever you worked out with your wife so that she can go shopping on Friday. You can head to camp. You're watching the kids or whatever the scenario was, or the mom and dads that were at your house.
I don't know if Jennifer read the recent letter we put to legislators. And when I wrote the letter, I really wanted to catch the attention of people in the real world, in their day-to-day type Thanksgiving. And I had said to the legislators, humbly, can I ask you what you do the day after Thanksgiving? And I worded it, are you unwinding? Are you cleaning up? Are you still in a position with family members still visiting? Or are you planning a Black Friday and Saturday shopping event with family or friends? I said, that's what hunters are now put in a position to deal with on that one day between Thanksgiving and before daylight on Saturday. So I think a lot of legislators, when they read that, they got it. They're starting to grasp this, that, hunting families have been alienated by this move.
Well, and I, before we go into that further, I want to make one quick comment on the youth here. And I want to mention that youth today are motivated differently than I am, and probably differently than you are,
us. Yeah.
And all of our viewers, right? So they want to be seen, they want to be recognized, right? They want the likes on Instagram, they want to make the TikTok video, whatever it is. And we know school systems, they struggle all the time with this concept of instant gratification and having to always have a consolation prize. And so what I fear is this push to rush up to camp, right? Friday night or whatever that looks like. And your next thing that you do is immediately get out into the woods, right? So what is the prize for new hunters if they don't get a deer? And then what have they gained, or what have they even learned? And what's going to continue to draw them back in when you take away that Friday, Saturday, Sunday? And I'd love to elaborate more. There.
If you don't get a deer, what do you come away with?
What are you going to post on Instagram? Seriously, what are you going to post on Instagram? If you don't have anything to show. And, the way with some of the decisions that have been made, most importantly, the opener, sure, we could try and get more youth hunters in, but how are you going to retain them? And I know myself, one of the biggest things that has retained me in the sport is my family. I mean, I walk into my cabin and the first thing that I see right there, dead center on the wall, is a picture of my grandpa. And that's what brings me back every year. And I will tell you, it took me many years to successfully fill my first tag. The amount of hours I spent in the woods, I don't even want to think about it. But I kept coming back.
Getting there.
I kept coming back. Yeah. And despite being the only girl in a one-room camp, you guys know what these camps look like, right?
Oh, yeah.
Nothing was going to stop me from getting there because I wanted to see my family. You have that like competitive spirit, right? It's a way of life, and we have stripped that from these new hunters, and now what their goal or what they're going to gain is filling their tag, and when they don't, they're not going to come back.
It's not a complete experience. Exactly. The complete experience of the preface, because the individual that Dan and I are going to bring up about the program, the schools. And to let everybody know, we had a 3.5-hour meeting with Executive Director Burhans and Commissioner Denny Fredericks at the Boulevard office. And that meeting led to this gentleman on, I put him on my speakerphone, and he ultimately, when he was talking, he was steadfast against the Saturday opener, and he went on to say, we used to have a camp years back, but the traditions that we had developed at that camp years back, and then we sold the camp eventually, he said, we carried those traditions back home with us, that Friday, that Saturday, that Sunday. And he said, although they weren't at camp, they were still cherished traditions amongst myself, my father, and our family that we did every year. And he said, and since the Saturday opener, the time not being there anymore, those traditions now don't happen. And we have been hearing that thousands of times over and over and over. And subsequently, individuals that are telling us that, well, the Saturday thing we thought was nice first year, second year, we'd give us a try. They've come to the conclusion that after a couple of years, we don't like this. We don't like the rush. We don't like the conflict with Thanksgiving. And let's face it, we're all hunters are humans. We do things. We procrastinate to the last minute. And having that few days after Thanksgiving, you had that last minute time.
Sure.
Shoot your gun. Whoops, I forgot to buy new gloves, or
Yep.
Put your stand up. One of the things that you, Jennifer, go into what you and I discussed last night at our pre-podcast meeting about hunt where the deer are. And that's all part of that Saturday strategy of like formulating a plan on where everybody's going to be. And so go ahead and elaborate on that. That was actually really good stuff.
Absolutely. So yes, there's two aspects of this Friday, Saturday, Sunday time frame. It's preparing yourself to be as successful as you can, right? And then of course this safety aspect. So I'll comment on both of those. The first part is I want to be clear. Hunting is a gamble. Filling your tag is not guaranteed, and that's why I have this concern that our youth coming in, that's the first thing and the only thing they're thinking about. But we really got to make that clear, okay? You're not guaranteed a deer. You're not guaranteed to fill your tag. Remember Jeremiah Johnson's quote, right? The mountain has its own way. We can't control the patterns, but we can take the time to successfully prepare ourselves to possibly increase the odds, right? So there's an article, those of you who get Deer and Deer Hunting Magazine, it's from this month. So it's the December 2023 article, magazine. And it was titled, Hunt Where They Are, Not Where You Want Them to Be. And the author states, and I'll quote, I'm going to go ahead and read it. But the author states, sign comes in two forms, yesterday's and today's. You should only be concerned with what was made today, not this past week, last month, or even the past year. So to me, you need a couple of days before to scout the woods, because remember that you have your scouting tactics and your strategy is different in bow season. So I'm not even going to talk about that right now. So I want to call that piece out. But really, scouting should be done just ahead of your hunt to have the most success. But as I mentioned, there's other things that you need to do to make sure that you are safe and you are in the right mindset. You're not rushed. I mean, I have heard hunters having to come up on Friday night or extremely early Saturday morning. I mean, that's not safe, first of all. But let's talk about those other activities. So sighting in your gun, right? This is the essential pre-hunting activity. It goes without saying.
And Jen, that's where the procrastination sometimes comes in. Some hunters, quite a few of them.
Yeah, we talked about that today, Randy, the number of hunters that only hunt this season. Go ahead.
Yeah, if you haven't bumped your scope and you know your gun's probably still on from last year, you're always, maybe you didn't. Some hunters don't take the effort to go out in the middle of the summer and shoot the gun and so forth. So they come to camp. That sighting in session, whether it be Friday at a shooting range, Saturday at a shooting range, Sunday or whatever at your camps, whatever. I mean, it was something that was not just part of a necessary aspect. It was fun.
Yeah.
There was a friendly competitiveness amongst your guys who shot the best, the laughing, the joking if somebody had pulled a bad shot. And it was just, you can't explain the camaraderie that comes from every one of these traditions and necessities. When you mentioned the safety factor getting up there, that happens to everybody. Now we're seeing a situation like at our camp. My brother and I are sitting there waiting for both of our sons to come up. It's 8 o'clock at night. They're coming up after dark, have to go out in the morning. And, to not be cognizant of the aspect in Pennsylvania that our average hunter age is 54, 55. When you had the Friday, Saturday, Sunday, you had a lot more time to plan and schedule and leave during daylight hours, maybe work around bad weather, so forth and so on, going into a rural area which has poor maintenance, road maintenance perhaps.
Yep.
These are very real life experiences that the older guys were able to handle before with a lot more ease and a lot less stress. And your aspect, which you brought up there about that, what time you travel when you get there, that fact that you have to put our hunters in a predicament, in a position to hurry, to rush, to travel maybe after dark where they previously never would have. That's a part of this. This is an enormously big pie. I mean, it's not a pie we're cutting into 4 pieces. You could cut this pie into 100 pieces.
You can,
and
yeah.
There's so many aspects.
And to arrive to camp, in the dark. And let's also mention that in some areas, and I'm sure that our listeners know this, we don't have service. So if you don't hear from them and they're coming up late, I mean, that's just, another added element. But for those who get up to camp and it's already dark, please explain to me how you're going to go check your tree stand, right? Or wherever you're going to hunt. And then the gear piece, right? What if you are missing something? What are you going to do? And some of these things are not just nice to have. You need to have them when you're going out into the woods. If you don't, some things can cause injury if you don't have something that you need. And there's no time to run to town and replace it.
Right.
And then as you guys know, setting up camp and it's for many of us, it is not as easy as walking in the door and turning the lights on. I mean, I'll speak from experience. It's a drawn out process, and it should not be rushed. You've got to make sure that you've got your heating system, you got required fuel. What about water supply?
Yeah, food. All the food has to be put in.
Yeah, it's a lot of work.
The bed's cold. I mean, the commode's cold. I mean, it's just not a fun experience. I mean, when you get into an ice cold camp in the dead of winter. This was one of the comments, those perceptive comments that was put in that 2018 meeting by then Commissioner Layton when he went hunting with Executive Director Burhands on a turkey hunt. And he looked at Brian and he said, "Brian, remember we went to your camp?" He said, "We went in, unlocked the door, turned on the lights, and 10 minutes later we're having a cup of coffee."
Must be nice.
Yeah.
And there's some truth to that in April, but not in December.
Right.
And not in a lot more primitive camps that we have. I mean, some camps have, evolved into more modern and so forth, but there's still, a lot of preparation, a lot of upfront things that need done that I wish I was as sharp as these Saturday guys that have everything done. Their guns are sighted. They don't make a mistake. They don't forget anything. They don't, that's how they portray this. You should be ready. Well, damn it. People in this country are realistically with their families on Thursday. And the fun of the talk around the Thanksgiving table was part of the fun, too, of the hunt. But to state that everybody should have every I dotted and T crossed on Friday, it's not realistic in the real world.
Yeah, not
it's
only
just
that.
not.
And it actually, I'm going to touch on something here that we haven't talked about before. Pennsylvania is involved in many, many leases on state ground.
Yeah.
I don't know, Randy, how many? It's got to be thousands of leases, and those are all primitive camps.
Yeah. And the Pennsylvania State Camp Lease Association has sent, their support from the beginning of this. They saw this was not beneficial. And although some groups didn't like this change, and that's where, again, I keep reverting back to some of these commissioner comments. In that 2018 meeting, Commissioner Mike Mitrix, he chimed in and he said, "The only reason these guys want to keep it on Monday is because that's the way it's always been. I can see no justifiable reason, not one, no justifiable reason why it should stay on Monday." And that came from another commissioner in that same meeting. So that comment in and of itself, shows a disconnect and a lack of understanding of what came down that weekend. The economic side, and so forth, all intertwined. And when you see that decision-making process and it missed that whole why perspective that you mentioned, Jen, you know, it's just why we're here today. And that's why we're going to run down that real quickly here at the end of this, and of how this started. And if anybody's sitting there saying, why was this not, I want to tell you one thing. I just received a survey, Dan. I just got this today, and Jen, from a local county that they are still surveying their people about the deer opener today. And
5 years later.
And so 5 years later, it's just still a common divisive topic. And if this was a good decision, we'd have went away. This would have went away. License sales would have increased. There wouldn't be legislation on the table. I mean, you want to keep going? And that's why we're here today. But Jen, go ahead. If you want to go ahead and finish up with some things, and then we're going to.
Yeah. And I'll just think about just what you just said. We're 5 years down the road from this change. We've gained nothing. We've lost hunters. I think, it's we need a refresh. We need the Game Commission to think about this poor reputation that they have. They don't respect the Pennsylvania hunter if they're allowing this change to go on for so long with these negative impacts. They're not doing anything about it, So to spin that in a more positive manner, right? What can they do? And I always tell people, if you've got a problem, come with a solution, right? We need to think about the brand. We need to make sure that we're appealing to all ages of hunters and beyond just hunting, but and new messaging. I think the commission really needs to sit down and think about what they've done and what they've shared and fix what has been broken for so long.
And to bring youth in by changing an opener that's not the answer. That they missed the boat completely, and they need to put programs and have a brand, a product that they're putting out there that is going to be something that youth want to be involved in.
Sure. Yes.
Let's make it clear, Dan, that what you just said was told to the Board of Commissioners by then Hunter Outreach Coordinator Derek Stoner that your perceived benefits for this were not going to affect the youth demographic of our hunters. He said this to them in 2019 in March. And that's the sad part about this, that this continues to be, I don't quite get why at this point in time, because we offered a solution. Jen, you brought something up. If you're gonna bitch about something, come with an answer. Bring something there to help. And what we said early on after and that's why I said this was to get the 3 days of Sunday hunting mission accomplished. So let's take another look at this. If your concern was to help out weekend hunters that couldn't hunt Monday, let's just say put in the Sundays. And then now you have a 14-day run, 2 full weekends. You've reinstated and restored all the benefits that came to the side of this argument that loves the Monday. That was a solution because, as Jim Daly said originally, he said, you don't do something to one group to hurt another. Because, the net outcome is zero.
Yeah.
And that's where we're at.
And I'll close with this. I think that the Saturday start truly robs new hunters of an opportunity to prepare for a safe and successful hunt. And I also believe that as an agency staffed with data scientists and analysts, plenty of them, who let them make this such a significant change without appropriate data. And I always say, the only rush that you should feel is a rush of excitement, right? Friday, Saturday, Sunday always set us up, no matter what age you were, for success. And this time spent together, preparing ourselves, learning best practice, waiting in anticipation, is something you absolutely cannot replicate in one day. And I get that we cannot control the patterns of the deer, but what we can control is we can promote lifelong hunting with strong bonds, meaningful hunting traditions, because let's face it, getting a deer, it should really just be the icing on the cake.
Right. And to go along with what you just said, the best people that they have to support bringing in the youth are the hunters that are out there right now, the older guys. We're the ones that make it happen. We're the ones that spend the money. We're the ones that make sure can't really afford to hunt. Don't worry about it, buddy. You're on scholarship. I mean, I've been there. I've done it, and that is all the social aspect that they completely misfired on. So,
Absolutely.
and I think they got more than they bargained for when Randy Santucci started this program long before I got involved. I've been in it now going on 3 years. Randy was before me, and I helped him rejuvenate him. He was ready to give up, and
deeply appreciate.
Yeah, it's been a great partnership. And again, we're not looking to win. This isn't about you. We win, you lose. No. We're looking to, and we offered our help, just like yourself. We're some smart. There's smart people in our group, very smart professional people, and we'd be glad to help them with some of these programs.
Of course.
Yeah.
So
it's and like I said, if anybody's out there still questioning, and this is what Dan and I wanted to end with today, thinking that somehow this decision came about in a manner that was, and we've discussed this a little bit throughout the podcast, when this was proposed by then Commissioner Daly, it went to the meeting, the staff reports came in, Jim leaned back in his chair and said, this isn't going to work. And what he meant by that was the change. And because the data that was presented at that time by Dr. Jagno about hunters lapsing and the 19 reasons and everything pointed to this is not the answer to what he originally thought. And I give Jim a lot of credit. I've said this in previous podcasts. Once he assessed what came in, the hunter comment period that's required came in 82% opposed. The legislative input, which is part of the policy guidelines for commissioners, came in. In fact, it came in so strongly that the two chairmen of the two committees summoned the board back to Harrisburg to reconsider their vote. Now, if that isn't a legislative input, I don't know what is. And it just went on and on and on that everything said this was not good. This was a bad idea. And Jim tried to reach it back. He withdrew his proposal. He tried to reach to the other commissioners, sent them letters, and said, please, I misstepped on this. This is not what the hunters want. And then he started to understand this tradition, this culture in Pennsylvania. And Jim today is still trying to help, get this thing turned around. But, to look at, that one commissioner, it's very arguable that he was the only one, other than the two did vote with him later in April to not change it. That was Commissioner Mitrick at the time. He changed his mind. And Tim Layton, who was president, I think he was president at the time. But the fact of what he did and the way he assessed the data of what he was supposed to assess, ultimately resigned over this. And Jim didn't resign as he was been portrayed as a quitter. Jim resigned because he could not, with good conscience, as a professional, support and could participate on a board that had all the evidence in front of them pointing one direction and they went the other. So I think in some respects, Jim may wish he didn't react as quickly and resign, because he would have been able to stay on board to work with this problem. But what he did was something I think he did for our hunters and he did for himself. And today he stands in testimonial 5 years later. And when he did an article or did a comment in an article in Erie, Go Erie, Pennsylvania, and that was in 2020, I think, right after he resigned, he ended with this statement, something to the effect of, I cannot participate, with a board that cannot assess things in a manner that was, obvious and clear. And he left. And like I said, the hunters out there thinking somehow this whole Saturday change came about from an in-depth study like you talked about, Jen. It didn't. I mean, it came out of nowhere. I served on the governor's council. I was involved in many sportsmen's groups, statewide and otherwise. I've never heard this brought up prior. I mean, this fell out of the sky. And it's unfortunate where we're at today, but I think the growing sentiments to go back to Monday are real. And but anyway, Jen, thank you for your input today. It was excellent. Everyone, I want to thank everybody here that's following our podcast and supporting Going Back to the Monday, the legislators, as well as all the business owners and hunters. Jen, I want to thank you today for an outstanding, involvement and bringing something very professional to this argument that you live with every day in your line of work. And of course, my partner, Dan, who so eloquently states that this was the Super Bowl, that they've changed and made it now like a regular season game for a 2-10 team. I think that sums it up totally.
And we have a lot in common with the Steelers.
Today, unfortunately, unfortunately.
Ouch.
But thank you, everybody, and we'll do another one short. And we're not going to wait several months. We're going to stay with this. This has grown tremendously the past several weeks. So thank you.